Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seeks to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Carl Cranney. I have a PhD in religion, and with me today are both my co-host, Liz, and our guest, Theric Jepson. However, there was a bit of a snafu in scheduling, so what we basically have done is recorded this podcast twice, one with just me and Liz, and then one with me and Theric. And so you're going to get the Carl Cranney show, but just with one guest on at a time. And with me today is my co-host, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I am Liz Busby. I teach writing at BYU, and I study the intersection of religion and science fiction and fantasy.
Theric, could you introduce yourself for our podcast audience, please?
I'm Theric Jepson. I'm an author and teacher. I'm the current editor of Ariantum, which is the literary journal of the Association for Mormon Letters.
Today we're going to be talking about Sketch, a 2025 family movie about a family going through grief and a child's drawings come to life. The film was written and directed by Seth Worley and distributed by Angel Studios. But first, our Best Books segment, where we each recommend one thing we are watching, reading, or listening to. Liz, why don't you lead us off?
Okay, my recommendation this time is for something a little less serious. I needed something light and something to keep me going in a particularly busy season of my life. And so I have been rapidly consuming on audiobook The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. If you haven't heard of this series or seen people rapidly consuming it on your Goodreads, you're not connected to the same people I am, because I have seen a lot of people just storm through these. We read the first volume for book club, then it kind of took off in our whole ward. The premise is that these are the journals of a young woman in late Victorian, early modern times. She's an orphan. Both of her parents passed away, and she's just about to reach her majority and be able to take ownership of the house and the trust fund that is supposed to support her for the rest of her life. Things do not go the way they are planned. There's all sorts of funny characters, a really nasty uncle. The neighborhood she lives in London is very quirky and amusing. There's kind of some light magical realism there, too. There's a Roman ghost that haunts the neighborhood, as well as like kind of a curse on the neighborhood where people's objects disappear and reappear in other people's houses. So they have like a neighborhood exchange set up where you can go put the things that have randomly appeared in your house there and then pick up the things that have randomly disappeared from your house. Anyway, which causes all kinds of shenanigans. So the books are just straight up diary entries. Each volume is 2 months of the year, and the author has plotted this like a TV series. So the 6 books that make up the year have like an overarching plot, and each book has its own little plot, like an episode of a TV show. So it's really fun to read, and mostly you're reading for the voice. She has such a fun voice, Emma M. Lyon, the character who's writing the diaries, and it's just a delightful read. So that's The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower.
All right, thank you for that. My mother is one of those people. I don't think you're connected to her on Goodreads, but she's one of those people who's been burning through it. So that was recommended for our family book club. We picked something else, but maybe we'll have to suggest it again when time comes to pick a new book. My recommendation this time, I'm going to give you 2 recommendations. I started rereading Terry Brooks's The Word and the Void trilogy. Now, Terry Brooks is mostly known for his genre fantasy series, which are good. I kind of cut out in the middle of those because they just kept going on and on and on and on, and I was like, where are you going with this? And I'm not sure he was ever going anywhere with it. But he did do just a small trilogy set in contemporary America. I think if you go to the calendar and figure out what the dates are, it's like 1995, 2000, and 2010 are the dates of the 3 books. And it centers around a young woman who was 14, 19, and then 29 in these 3 sort of adventures that they have in a world where magic does exist amidst our contemporary society, but it's very background and hidden. And there's this huge war going on between the servants of the word, who are for goodness and society and civilization, and then the servants of the void, who are for dominion and destruction and chaos and all these things. And there's a knight of the word who shows up a man who is haunted by the dreams of the future he tries to prevent, and the magic exacts a heavy toll from him whenever he uses it. And it's a really interesting sort of world. But the reason I've gotten into it is because, or I picked it back up and remembered how good these were, is now that I'm a little more mature. I think I read these when I was in high school, maybe early college. Now that I feel like I'm a little more mature, I appreciate the thesis that a bunch of small decisions made for good or for evil can change the course of civilization. And just the way the trilogy ends, which I'm not going to spoil because you should all go read it, it's amazing, feels very Latter-day Saint to me. Like the way they end up changing the world is because of just these small choices they make throughout the course of the confrontation with these forces of the void, these demons, these once men. And I have grown to appreciate the small things we do in our lives to build a better world. Doesn't have to be some grandiose quest. It's just a 14-year-old girl, and then she's 19, and then 29. It's just these few days in her life that change the course of everything. And it's just great. And the other thing I'm going to recommend is just a pure popcorn flick. Predator Badlands was fantastic and amazing and everything you would expect. And the best thing is I could absolutely recommend it because there are literally no humans in the movie. All of the human characters are actually robots who have white blood, and the creatures mostly have black blood, and predators have green blood. So the movie is actually quite violent, but because none of the blood is red, it's PG-13, and it's fantastic. And so it's I think the first Predator movie to be PG-13, and it's just fun. Don't go in expecting Shakespeare or something grandiose or whatever, but it's fun, and it's good fun, and I appreciated it. And so, yeah, the Word in the Void trilogy, for those of you who are into dark, urban, contemporary fantasy with some weighty matters, and Predator Badlands, for those who want to see a predator try to kill a kaiju monster with basically a lightsaber. It's exactly what you'd expect, and it's just super fun. So those are my recommendations this time. Theric, tell us what your recommendations are this time for our podcast guests.
Thank you. Yes, when I listen to the podcast, I'm often like, don't you people know what one means? But it's my only chance, so I'm going to break the rule too. I'd really love to recommend Consider This, which is a new work of nonfiction about writing by Chuck Palahniuk. I picked it up from the library. I've read a couple of his novels. I think he's a good writer. I don't always like his stuff, but it was one of the most brilliant and insightful explanations of how to write that I've read. Honestly, it's up there with Stephen King's On Writing, and those are probably the two best mainstream books of the genre that I know. Loved it. And last week I watched a movie which reminds me a lot of Sketch, except for it's definitely more for grown-ups. It's called Max and Molly in the Future. It's online. You'll often see it described as When Harry Met Sally, 500 years in the future and in space. It's a very funny movie. It's very smart. I love the style of acting. It's so sharp in its commentary on our current moment, and I just really enjoyed it. And because I can't possibly make recommendations without sharing anything by a fellow Latter-day Saint, I would also love to, this is 13 years old, but there's an album called Faux Light by the band Loyal Wife, LDS Guy's band, just a recent discover for me, and I'm really loving it. So three, Carl. That's what I think one means.
Well, I'm a theologian professionally, and we can't count to three, so I think you're in good company there. That's fine. Max and Molly in the future, I like that you described it as When Harry Met Sally in the future in space, and I was like, well, I hope it's in space, because otherwise that means it's probably post-apocalyptic, and I don't know that we'd be as interested in that version of the timeline, but that's interesting. Thanks for all of those. I appreciate it. I hope our listeners find something from the three of us that you would be interested in exploring on your own. We'll have links to all of these recommendations on our website, popcultureapricottree.com. Buying through these links helps support our podcast so we can keep bringing you the conversations that we have here about the true and beautiful in pop culture. And now on to our main discussion of Sketch, this 2025 movie. I'll get us started just to say this felt very 1980s, like young fantasy movie to me, in that there were some sort of heavy themes in it, and it was also slightly terrifying. If you enjoyed movies and were maybe slightly traumatized by movies like The Goonies or Gremlins or Labyrinth or Dark Crystal, The Never-Ending Story. This feels like it would fit in sort of that genre of movie. It's basically about a family who has, full spoilers ahead for a lot of this, who've recently lost their mother and how they're all processing it. And then, of course, there's a magic pond that makes anything you throw into it come to life. And the poor girl who's been writing all these sort of dark sketches in her sketchbook, processing her grief, it ends up in the pond and all these monsters come to life and shenanigans ensue. And so I liked it quite a bit. I think I'm glad, Liz, that you told me not to watch it with my kids because I think it would have been a little too much for them. But I don't know. Part of me wants them to go watch Labyrinth for one of their family movie nights anyway.
Yeah, it is interesting that the dynamic has changed so much about what a kid's movie is since the 80s, right? I remember being absolutely traumatized by some of these, like The Never-Ending Story, like that will give you trauma forever. But nowadays, there aren't as many kids' movies that are like that. I mean, maybe like if you're showing kids Marvel movies, maybe like there's a lot of violence and scary things in there, but it's not the same kind of like horror-y existential dread.
Like the bad guy in The Never-Ending Story is the nothing that like obliterates you from existence. It's like, well, let's give our kids a dose of existential dread here along with our saddest horse death ever.
And it was interesting scrolling through the parent comments on Common Sense Media because like everyone is flipping out about this movie. And I think part of that is the trailer. The trailer made it seem like it's like a quirky, funny kids movie. And it did not give you the hint that this was a very dark movie. Because the monsters in the movie look really cute, right? The animation style of them, if you're only getting a few frames, is adorable. Like this big, tall, blue, sparkly monster with googly eyes, like it's fantastic and adorable.
It's the ones at the very end that I thought were particularly, that are just scribbled shapes come to life. That I was like, oh, this is now genuinely scary. Like, even the big blue funny monster, it is scary because it's attacking them and whatever else. That felt like there was a disconnect between the visual cue and what the monster was doing. But by the end of the movie, there is not a disconnect. And you're like, oh no, these things are really bad and genuinely freaky, even for me.
Some of the horror of it comes not from the visuals, but from the little girl's narration of it, right? Like the Eiders are terrifying because, you know, oh, they steal your coffee cup and then they steal your toenails and your eyeballs. And so like when the coffee cup goes missing, you're like, what is going to happen now? It was interesting. We did watch this for family movie night. And I've probably mentioned before on the podcast that I have a 9-year-old who's way more sensitive to movies. And she was pretty scared from straight up the beginning. Just the drawings that the girl was making were very disturbing to her because she is someone who's very sensitive and she has trouble with movies with any kind of plot or any kind of tension. But then I also have a 12-year-old who, when he was 3 and first found out what Family Search was, and we were showing him, these are all your ancestors, he said, I need to know how everyone on here died. So like, there are kids who like this movie is for them, and it acknowledges the fact that little kids are sometimes morbid and like really intense about things that you as an adult don't think are appropriate for them. This movie confronts that head on with this girl making really disturbing drawings because she's kind of being bullied at school and she's struggling in life, and that's how she copes with it. And like that's very realistic and not something we see in a lot of movies. At least as the protagonist character, right? Like the character who makes the scary drawings is the bully or the villain who then like becomes good later. No, she's the main character and the protagonist. And like we're asked to empathize with her.
I'm curious what you think about sort of the question. There's a moment at the beginning, towards the beginning of the movie, where the therapist says, well, I'm glad that you had these bad thoughts about this boy, but then you put them on the paper in this drawing instead of actually going to hurt this kid. I think that's very healthy. I don't know that I agree with that, but I don't have any experience in therapy, so maybe I don't know. It's also, I think, a slightly gendered response in that I think that for men, when we expend emotional energy, we expend it. That's why we can get in a fight with someone and then go afterwards and like have a, since this is a Latter-day Saint podcast, a hot chocolate or what, right? Like I made a lot of my friends in elementary school by getting in fights with these kids. and then we were best friends. I do not get the impression that that is a typical friendship accumulation strategy for women. And I don't know if putting your dark thoughts or getting your emotional energy out on paper would be useful in the same way that getting in fights with Mike across the street was for me in third grade.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are so many kids' movies that are about kind of the opposite of this. I'm thinking of like Harriet the Spy, where she's writing down everyone in the neighborhood's secrets and like conspiracy theories about them, and various movies where people's journals or diaries are stolen and read out loud and printed for the whole school, and like bad things can happen because you write stuff down. And especially in the age of social media, that goes double. Everything you write, you cannot count on this being private. You can't count on expressing it privately. So it's like, it is an interesting step, I feel like. It's definitely better than coming to school with a gun, right? Like, yes, this is better than that. I think we can all agree. But it's like, it's a transitional step to the next step, which is questioning why you're responding this way and resolving it in a more healthy way. I'm thinking of when my son was in therapy, I mentioned casually to his therapist that, oh, we're going to visit my family for Christmas, and I made a bingo card of all the things they do that annoy me. And so when I get a bingo, I can go out and get an ice cream or something and get away from them. And he's like, that's interesting. Have you also thought about what it would mean if you don't get a bingo? What if these things don't happen? It's a step on the way to externalize these feelings, but then you need to go the next step to question these feelings and say, but what if what I'm anticipating isn't real? And what if, like, it's not a healthy response to the world to draw people dying violently? Like, what if that is not good for me? That's the next step. And the movie gets there at the end, right? That, like, this has been her way of dealing with the fact that her mother's died and her brother and her dad won't talk to her about it and act like everything's normal.
And I appreciate your point that maybe this is healthy as a step, says the guy who just recommended Predator Badlands as a movie. Drawing violent things is maybe not necessarily healthy, but it could be something on the way to being healthy, a way of processing the situation, which is one thing that I liked about the movie. And I think I'm going to use this in my own parenting. It's just that idea where the dad tells the kids, you can't control your inbox, but you can control your outbox, right? Like, it's something we've hit in parenting our children. Like, well, I know that he did that, but you are only responsible for yourself. Let me be the parent. I'll deal with him, but you are in charge of only you, which is a lesson I think even we adults could stand to review sometimes.
Well, it's very Stoic philosophy. There's a reason Stoicism is so popular nowadays, that this philosophy that I'm only going to have angry feelings about the things I can control, and I can't control what happens to me. And therefore, I should be indifferent to it. I should only care about, am I being a virtuous and good person, and not care about the circumstances that I'm in. And that's easier said than done. I don't remember who said that was the error of Stoicism, to believe that what we can do once, we can do always. It's not a reasonable way for it to go about as a human being, expecting to be perfectly indifferent to everything that happens to us. But it is a positive attitude to have towards the world, that I cannot control what people say or what people do towards me. I can only control my response, and I can choose not to be annoyed because I can't control that.
Right. And for me, the point that I think needs to be addressed in sort of this framing of you can't control your inbox, you can only control your outbox, is that I think on some level in the movie, it seems like the dad is also saying you can't control your emotions. Those are part of your inbox and you can't control those. I mean, I think that's true to a certain extent, but it's not perfectly true that these emotions are just facts of the universe that we have no control over. So I think I disagree with it in that sense, but there is something I think very powerful about saying, okay, this thing happened. Now, how are you, Miss Young Girl, going to react to these circumstances in which you find yourself? Because you do not control them until your sketchbook comes to life, and then it turns out you have a horrifying amount of control on this over the situation. Would she have drawn that if she knew it was going to attack her bus? Would she have drawn Dave? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Probably not. Anyway, I like the philosophy. I think it's a good one-liner. In practice, it's a little more complicated, obviously. And the dad certainly isn't doing a good job of it by hiding all the pictures of the mom and never talking about it with his kids as he goes through the grief, just trying to be there for them. None of them are handling it well, which is sort of the point of the movie about this family.
It's interesting to see a dad in this case who has made a parenting mistake, but he doesn't fall into the stereotype of the bumbling dad, which is the only father we get portrayed in most fiction, especially Hollywood movies, right? So it is nice to see that he does care about his daughter. He tries to gain more parenting skills. He tries to figure out, okay, how can I accept the fact that my daughter's drawing these disturbing things? How can I respect her privacy? He's a very thoughtful parent, which we don't get from a lot of movie dads. So I was very grateful for that, even though he's made this obvious mistake of hiding all of the pictures of the mom and trying to pretend like life is normal.
It seems like the son has picked up on that strategy of coping, because we don't really see the son/brother dealing with these emotions the same way. In that sense, it seems to be mostly a movie about the dad and the daughter and how the dad's not handling it well and she's not handling it well. And then towards the end, all of them hug, including her with her new tentacle squid arm weapons, which is quite fun.
I do think they had an interesting point about him, though, at the emotional climax of the movie when he basically tells his sister, like, our whole lives now revolve around trying to protect you and fix you. And that's an experience we don't talk about a lot, like what it's like to be the sibling of someone who is going through a lot of things. And like a lot of the family resources are going towards how do we help this person emotionally? How do we get them to therapy? How do we accommodate their behaviors while they're trying to work through this? And how it feels to be the sibling of someone like that and feel like I can't bring up my problems because my sibling has all these problems and that's what we've got to fix right now. So it was interesting to see that dynamic with the brother. It's only there for like a tiny bit, but I think it's a really important thing that we need to talk about.
And actually a 90-minute movie. There's only so much you can cram in. That's a fair point. And I always tell my sons, what do we use our strength for? Helping and protecting. But also want to make sure that, self-care should be part of your psyche as well. And it just doesn't seem to come up with the son very much.
Can we talk about what the pond does? In your summary, you said it brings stuff to life, but like, the way he finds out about it first is that it fixes his broken cell phone and the cut on his wrist. This is the fantasy nerd in me, the magic system nerd. I was like, what exactly does this pond do? Because it's not quite clear. And part of the suspense of the second half of the movie is you realize that the older brother is carrying around his mom's ashes in his backpack because he thinks if he throws them in the pond, it will bring her back to life. And it's kind of terrifying. And the movie doesn't ever have to deal with what will happen because he loses some of the ashes.
It's very Pet Sematary.
Okay, I have not seen Pet Sematary.
That's the Stephen King novel / it's been made into, I think, a couple of different movies where
I know it's a Stephen King novel.
Where they find this, I think it's like an ancient Indian burial ground where if you put something in the ground, it comes back to life. And so like, I think the kid's cat dies and they discover this burial ground. It's a cemetery for pets because they bury it there and then the cat comes back, but it's not quite right. And then at least in the one iteration that I've seen bits and pieces of, one of the kids in the family gets hit by a car and dies. And he put her in, and anyway, and so it's a Stephen King novel, right?
So bad things are going to happen.
So to me, the magic of the pond was, and this is very pop culture on the Apricot Tree. Maybe I'm reading too much into this more than I should, but it gives you like the desire of your heart relative to this object. I want this to be fixed. I don't want my hand to be injured. I wish to manifest these things that I put my heart and soul into because I'm grieving the loss of my mother and think this guy's a total jerk. And so that it ends up in the pond and it gives you what you want from this thing you've put in there. Here's our C.S. Lewis quote, right? You've always been in heaven and you've always been in hell, and both will speak true because you get what you want from God forever. So want the right things. So yeah, there's this horrifying moment and this is probably a random deep cut, but in like season 5 or 6 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, their mother dies. And there's a great episode where everybody is trying to just deal with the fact that Buffy's mother, Joyce, has died. And the episode is called The Body. I know Joss Whedon is sort of persona non grata in Hollywood now because it turns out he's a deeply misogynistic jerk, but the man can write a good episode of TV, and the body is one of them. But I think in the next episode, or maybe the one after that, Buffy's little sister enacts a ritual to bring back from the dead, and Buffy has to like put the kibosh on this to say, no, our mother is gone, and we have to like live in this new reality and deal with it. As you're seeing the shadow of Joyce like walking up the walkway through the windows, and then Buffy smashes the thing, Dawn opens the door, she's not there. And so there are different ways you can approach this idea of loss.
One of the cool things about fantasy that we can do that, right? That we can say, okay, if you had the ability to bring people back from the dead, should you? And I mean, that's like the whole core of Harry Potter as well. Should we fight death or should we accept it? Should we use magic to try to be immortal, to try to save the things and the people we love? Or should we be willing to let them go and accept it? And I was just totally terrified what was going to happen if you put the ashes in there. Like, honestly, it's like, oh no, let's not go there.
This is one of the reasons why, of the 3 rules the genie has for wishes, you can't bring people back from the dead is one of them, because it never ends well. And maybe this is a movie we should do sometime on Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, because I think it has some interesting things to say about death and accepting it. And it kind of takes a Buddhist view of it. It's called The Fountain. It's by Darren Aronofsky. And in the soundtrack of the movie, one of the names of the tracks, sort of the main theme, is entitled Death is the Road to Awe. And it's just a really interesting sort of meditation on death and loss and dying and accepting it and what that brings forth in your own life and in the universe. It's something we all have to wrestle with. And of course, as Latter-day Saints, there are stories of people being brought back from the dead, not in a permanent sense, not until the resurrection, but as far as I know, Lazarus continued to grow old and died. He's still hanging around, like the Myths of Cain or whatever, that new book on the 3 Nephites I haven't read yet, but I really want to. How do you deal with loss and grief and death comes for us, and it's part of the plan, and yet to lose your mother so young for these 2 characters is obviously devastating.
I mean, I think that's just about it. Like, the fact that the movie really processes that instead of... and it processes it in a pretty dark way. That, like, kids going through grief can become, like, kind of scary people sometimes. Like, and be mad at the world. I feel like a lot of times when we have a child character who's lost a parent, it's often that they're on some quixotic quest to fix the world and they're trying to be happy and optimistic. And we're scared to show that side of kids when they're like actually dark and scary the way Amber is in this film. So I think it's nice to show that side of grief as well, that it can make you angry with the world. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person. I do have to share my one nitpick with the film that kept throwing me and my husband out, as we are very organized house sellers. So the fact that the dad hangs around in the car on the driveway while people are touring the house, we kept just absolutely shouting at him, "Why are you doing this? Real estate agent, don't let him do this. Like, you are not allowed to be around the house when people are being shown the house. This is not a thing." So anyway, we were very upset that he... Like, it's funny when he keeps running back in, but the fact that he's sitting in the car, that's what bothered us. That he's sitting in the car in the driveway. It's like, that is just weird. The person who you're buying the house from should not be within 20 miles of the house.
But I feel like if I had been in the theater watching this with people, that would have gotten... like, every time the joke came up that he runs back in because he spilled coffee, he runs back in because the school is calling about something. There's always, like, quasi-legitimate reasons to run into the house. And the real estate agent just keeps getting more and more exasperated with him. I feel like that would have landed better, but if I'd been among people, like some movies are better to watch with people, and this, I feel like, would have been one of them. Just me watching it alone in my basement didn't land like that. Even good horror movies, like, it's more fun to watch them with people so you can all, like, scream at the same time or, like, be clutching each other or, holding your breath all together or something.
I do agree that the real estate agent does have, like, the best deadpan line there. Like, do you actually want to sell this house? After he's done this to her a few times, she's like, and what are you doing? Are you sabotaging this? Which is what it always looks like, and it's not. We didn't mention the real estate agent is played by Janet. Not Janet,
right.
but
Darcy
Janet
Carden.
From The Good Place. Yeah. Darcy Carden. Yes, but like every time she came on screen, I was like, it's Janet. She's going to help him.
I had that same experience. It's interesting when you see some people and they show up and you're just like, oh, that is now your role forever. I didn't expect Janet to be one of those, but absolutely. As opposed to the guy who plays Jason in The Good Place was this Sith Lord in The Acolyte. And I had no idea until after I watched the whole thing. I'm like, that's Jason? So good on you for like not being a stereotype. You could be this stoner loser from Florida and a freaking Sith Lord apprentice to Darth Plagueis himself. All right, well, let's go ahead and close out this short just by doing our ratings segments. So, of course, we have clean versus objectionable material. We rate it celestial, terrestrial, telestial, or outer darkness. I'll go first on this one. I think... Ooh, that's actually a hard one because I feel like some of the darker stuff pushes it into the telestial territory, and yet it still feels like it's mostly appropriate for kids in that there's weight to it emotionally that causes it to be a higher rating, but it's not directly offensive. But I think I'm going to go with telestial because this is the world in which we now live. And this movie feels like that to me with all of the fun sometimes and all of the horrors that can come about just because of our mortal circumstances. So I'm going to give it a telestial, but maybe it's a telestial plus.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go one level up. I'm going to go terrestrial. The darkness and the seriousness of the grief, I would still put in celestial, but there is a lot of language, and it is, I mean, for a family movie, there's a lot of language. Like, this is not an R-rated movie, but there's a little bit of startling language if you're watching it with children. And then it is, like, scary. Like, genuinely scary for a family film. And I think we have to acknowledge that, like, a lot of people thought this was a family movie and went into it with those expectations and were not pleased. So I think it's important to know that. So maybe don't watch it with... Your kids are much younger than mine, Carl. So my youngest is 9, and she was on the borderline. And my older kids were all fine with it. But it is kind of dark in terms of, like, talking about, you know, taking a sword and stabbing your classmate. And they talk about it at length. But they don't show it or do it, but, like, they talk about it a lot.
And the actress who plays Amber does it very deadpan, too. And you're like, are you going to grow up to be a serial killer? Because it seems like that's a possibility. And sort of the way you're handling this, you know, but even the grief is itself celestial because Christ is celestial, yet he was a man acquainted with sorrows and grief. I'll bump mine up to terrestrial as well. But yeah, go, as you should with all movies you watch with your kids, go read the Common Sense Media comments first. That sounds like a good rule of thumb that may have saved some parents a bit of therapy for their kids with this one. Our next rubric is artistic merit, skillful, effective use of craft. We use 1 to 5 popcorn balls. I'll let you go first on this one, Liz.
Given that this is not a Hollywood production, it's an independent film that got picked up by Angel Studios. The budget is not huge. I think they did an amazing job. I believe all of the crayon monsters, like, they're both cute and well rendered and also kind of terrifying at the same time. You can tell they're made out of craft materials, but then they're alive and they're moving. The child actors are really good. Like, honestly, you just said Amber, like, she sells it that she is a very disturbed child. The brothers maybe not quite as good. We didn't even talk about the boy that she is mad at, who is teasing her all the time and is kind of like the ADHD boy of the school. He's really good too. Like, he is a character, and he has a lot of evolution in his perception in this movie for a side character who's not the main character of the show. I think the writing is good. It's both, like, serious and heartwarming, and also lots of puns, very punny, as it should be, with dads in charge of the movie and in charge of the family. So I can't. Should I give it 5 popcorn balls? I mean, I think it's one of the better family movies I've watched in a long time. I think I might give it 5 popcorn balls.
It's funny you bring up how good of actors you thought the kids were, because I actually, with the 2 boys, the brother and then Bowman, the bully / love interest, like, they did that whole, oh, they tease you because they love you, which I don't think is true. You guys don't say that. Both of them I thought landed. I was like, oh, this is obviously a child actor trying to do child acting. Like when I watch the kids at Stranger Things, I really believe that those kids are those characters. And in this case, I'm like, oh no, this is a kid acting like it. So I'm gonna give it 4 just for that. But one thing I agree with you 100% on is the crayon monsters, the chalk monsters. I love that every time they switched one of the eiders, little puffs of orange chalk when like the whole house, when the dad and the real estate agent get back, they're like, what happened here? It looks like a chalk massacre. I'm like, well, because it kind of was. But I absolutely believe that if there was a small chalk spider with an eye, that's what it would look like. So kudos to everybody. So yeah, 4.5 popcorn balls. The 2 young boys did not quite land for me as well as they did for you. But with regard to the themes, the special effects, the writing, I think this was a good movie. And our final rating is Gospel Connections, morally edifying messages. And it's my turn. I'll go first. You know, if you've listened to the podcast, that I don't give something 5 apricots unless there's an explicit connection to Christ or God or the gospel in some way. There is none in this, but I feel that is maybe a failing of the way I approach this rating, because this was a really good movie with regard to family and communication and dealing with grief and loss and helping your child become more mentally healthy when they've gone through a traumatic experience. Like there is a lot of really good stuff here. And so I'm giving it 4 apricots, but I strongly iterate that is just because I reserve the 5s for those with explicit gospel connections. This was a really good movie. If you watch this with your age-appropriate child, you could have a lot of good conversations about this movie.
I'm going to give it the 5 because I feel like there's so many good messages in here to talk to kids about grief, like you said, mental health, even being brave and like dealing with the consequences of your actions. The fact that the way Amber has expressed her emotions has now caused chaos and she has to deal with that. And she accepts responsibility for that. That even is a really good message. And also the message in the end that like, you are not a bad person. You are not the worst thing that you did, right? You're not the worst thing that you thought about someone. That's a really powerful message to kids who can sometimes, have a fight with their friends and feel like everything is ruined forever. That's the girl mode of fighting. You fight with your friend, it's like, well, I guess we'll never be friends again. It's the end of the world. It is redemptive in the end that it says like, Amber, you are not this monster that you drew of yourself who hates the world and who is violent. You are not that person. You are redeemable and you can grow and change. And I think that's extremely powerful from a gospel lens. The idea of repentance is there. Even if Christ isn't there, there is the idea of I can grow and change and become a better person by taking responsibility for the things I did and then growing past them.
We didn't talk about it, but especially the part where she has to confront the literal demon of her dark self. It's very sort of child picture of Dorian Gray-ish. But imagine the picture came to life and was trying to stab your friend. Oh, that the negative parts of us could be manifested in some physical way so we could just make a Minecraft sword and defeat them. That would be a lot easier than our having to take the long way around through the atonement and repentance. But redemption, you're right, is a very important and good part of this movie. And get into our main discussion of Sketch here with Theric. I want to open it up just to you for your general thoughts about the movie itself. I'll start really quick just to say that we covered this a little bit with Liz, that I felt like the genre of this movie was like 80s kids horror movie, like Gremlins, Neverending Story, just that sort of stuff. And I found myself a little nostalgic for my childhood in watching it.
I totally agree. I can't think of very many kids' movies that really scratch that itch from the last 10 years. I mean, I can think of a couple that get close. There's one, I believe it's called 8-Bit Christmas, that kind of felt like this. I listened to the commentary last night, and there were so many references to E.T. and Goonies and Jurassic Park. So they were very much influenced by that era. And I think there's something really beautiful about the movies of that era. Some of them I didn't like as a kid. I have still never seen Goonies all the way through. But there's a real beauty in finding light in the darkness which I think some movies are afraid to do. And I think this movie really finds that balance, which is the whole purpose of mortality, is to figure these things out. I'll also mention that I saw this movie in theaters, and I made my whole family go. We went on my birthday. That was the day it opened. And so I was able to make like my teenagers go too. But all of us loved it. I loved it. My wife loved it. 18-year-old loved it. 16-year-old loved it. The 8-year-old loved it. We all really liked the movie. I probably laughed the most, though the 8-year-old was pretty close with me. I by far jumped the most. I'm a pretty jumpy guy. But we really enjoyed it, and it gave us stuff to talk about. And I know that is often something that pop culture and the Apricot Tree is interested in, is like, is there something to talk to your kids about afterwards? And I think this movie really provides that.
So I'm curious that you say that your 8-year-old really liked it, because we've talked about how so my oldest is 9, and I thought this might have been a little intense for her, and her 9-year-old like basically walked out of the movie. She's like, nope, this is too much for me. And so I think that's interesting that your young child enjoyed it. And I just made the executive decision on behalf of my kids, and Liz's daughter just noped out of the movie. What do you think it was about your 8-year-old that made them like it so much? I'm just curious.
It's a great question. And honestly, I think part of it is the theatrical experience. It's different being in the theater. And she was a little stressed out about it. She did jump. But I also think because the movie is so funny, even at its scariest moments, the monsters are really charming and cute simultaneously when they're at their most frightening. And I think that helped. But the other thing that helped was we're in a theater and you can cope with things a little bit easier. When we rewatched it last night, she did jump up and walk to the back of the room a few times, then come back. And then I watched it again with the commentary, and she hung out, but wasn't paying very close attention. All my kids had a point where they weren't scared by movies at all. And then they reach a point where everything is terrifying. And my daughter, when she was 4, her favorite movie was Nightmare Before Christmas. And then she didn't watch it for 4.5 years. And then we just rewatched it, and it was fine. So I think part of it is just age. And the thing is, something about movies that are slightly scary is that because you have survived them, that you own them in a way that maybe you don't a movie that was too cute, right? Like, so she owns this movie now. She really wants to show it to her friends on her birthday, which is funny because the kid who's 16 now, when he was her age, the movie he wanted to show his friends was Jaws. And so, so you just never know, man.
Theric, you are raising your kids right. I got to tell you, that's fantastic. No, that's a compelling point about once you finished a movie, you own it. I have a sister-in-law who watched The Orphanage at BYU's International Cinema, which is an unbelievably scary movie.
So I've heard. I have not seen it, but that's what I've heard.
It's terrifying and one of the best horror movies I've seen, like probably ever. But she watched the last half of it, third of it, like literally with her hands over her eyes. And so I talked to her about it when I watched it years later, and she said, oh, I still feel like I have trauma from that movie because I didn't actually watch it. And what I should probably do is just put it on the TV and turn the mute button on so I can just watch it and see what happens. So she is still processing that movie because she never actually watched the whole thing. And that is, I think, an interesting psychological twist. Like, don't cover your eyes, because then you will never quite feel like you have actually completed the movie and there's no resolution for you.
It's really interesting. I remember I was probably about 8 when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the final scene is with the Ark opens was so terrifying. And I was so afraid to go to bed that night. I just knew I was going to have nightmares. But I very intentionally, while I was in bed, like sort of went through it and forced myself to think happy thoughts, and I didn't have nightmares. And although I wouldn't say that I loved that movie until I was an adult, it was just the process of really trying to process it and live through it on my own, using my own agency to process something I had seen. I don't know, I felt like a different person after that. I wasn't as afraid of things like a movie. Like, I knew it couldn't hurt me and it was okay. Like, it was a very growing up experience for me. Don't know that I'd necessarily recommend that to a child, but it worked for me.
Well, it worked better than it did for me, and we're going to transition this back to a conversation about the movie, because I never did any kind of therapy after watching E.T. and X-Files as a child. And I tell you, there was a movie that came out on Hulu 2 years ago called No One Will Save You, and it only has 5 lines of dialogue, like in the entire movie, and it's about this girl who has been ostracized by her community for some quite not really revealed until the end of the movie. Aliens show up and she has to like fight them off, and it's sort of a home invasion movie with extraterrestrials, like the gray aliens, the ones you see on all the with the big heads and the large eyes and the tiny little slits, and because those have been like the boogeyman for me for my entire life. And I literally put watching this movie off because I was like, I am going to have nightmares for a week, because when I turn the lights off, those are still the things that I'm like, oh, there's one in the room with me now. Like, I don't know why that is my feeling. Just my fear is gray aliens. And I watched it and I was fine. And I was like, oh, apparently now at the ripe old age of 43, I have finally grown out of this fear that I got, I think, starting with E.T. and then X-Files. I'm not sure what else like triggered this in me. I think maybe if I'd had a school teacher who was like, why don't you draw pictures of this, Carl? That will help you process this movie that you watched, or you going through experience with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the reason the PG-13 rating exists. I don't know if you knew that Spielberg was like, this is not a PG movie, like, and they only had that up until then. But yeah, Nazis having their faces melted off. This is not good. It's very scary. But in this movie, that's what this movie is even entirely about, is how do you process negative emotions? In this case, it's not fear, but it is grief and the loss of her mother that this young girl processes by becoming kind of violent and dark, and maybe not violent, but having violent thoughts, creating violent images. These are the Eiders, and they steal your things, and then they eat your eyeballs. And I was terrified of those things when they showed up in the rest of the movie, because I'm like, are they actually going to go, like, start trying to crawl on somebody's face? And I feel like that would bump the rating up quite a lot very quickly, but they never went there, even though she described it that way in the beginning of her explanations of what these various pictures in her sketchbook meant. So, I don't know, why don't you talk a little bit about that, like this experience and what it was like to see somebody, and then the unhealthy ways that the father, by taking all the pictures of the mother down, and the brother, who doesn't really seem to have much of an arc in this 90-minute movie. I don't know, talk a little bit about that, because I think that was sort of the theme of the movie, and something I think younger Carl would have benefited from, as opposed to just waiting until I grew out of my fear of gray alien a year and a half ago.
That's a really good point. I think this movie does something that I think a lot of great horror in particular does, is it trains us how to experience a kind of emotion and cope with it. I think a lot of my favorite horror movies do that, but this one's quite explicit. And the scene you mentioned where the therapist tells Amber to draw her feelings, and that's better than actually acting them out, and this is a very healthy thing to do. That's, I don't know if you and Liz already talked about that, but that was the seed of the movie. Someone told the writer, director, sister that, and he just thought, as a child, he was like, oh, I want to be the kind of grown-up who can talk to kids this way. And that was the seed of the movie. And I think that's a really beautiful lesson, is that there's ways to digest what you're feeling and turn it into something positive rather than letting it fester and rot. And you're right, there's the great line that the aunt character, Liz, she says, maybe instead of worrying about this girl, you should be worrying about the boys who aren't processing their feelings. It was stated much more elegantly. But I thought that was a really wise thing to do. And listening to the commentary, they pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. Speaking of the brothers' arch, the scene where the dad says, why don't you, I thought we were going to be real. When he tells him what's really happening, that he's afraid there are monsters in the woods, and the dad's like, would you stop? Like, I thought we were being real here. They talked about how important that scene was, because the son is telling his dad the truth, and the dad says, why don't you be real to me? And in that moment, the brother, Jack, is wounded in a new way. And so he too is now seen as a liar, sort of like how Amber is seen as dangerous and violent. And as Bowman calls her, maybe there is something wrong with you. And so now both the children have something where they need to be reconnected to their father. Both of them, the loss of their mother has separated them in some ways, but the girl is having these issues with trust and violent feelings that she's committing to paper. And now the boy is seen as a liar. And so they both need to reconnect with their father, and it puts them on a more equal footing, which I thought was really interesting storytelling and something I hadn't really picked up on when I watched it. I think I picked up on it emotionally, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate it without it being pointed out to me.
It's a good lesson. Sometimes you get things from reading the script of a movie can help you understand what they were going for. I remember when I read the script for Heretic, which we did an episode on, I, as a sort of professional religion academic guy. I read it and I was like, no, you can't just say that they're quoting this dude in the script because this is this relatively obscure anti-religious writer. Like, you have to put that in the script somehow. But listening to the commentary also will help bring things out. Neither Liz nor I noticed that. I mean, obviously I saw the movie and noticed that moment, but it occurred to me that that was you see the inception of the break between the husband and the father and the son. It's just kind of assumed it's there for Amber. It's sort of, it happened before the credits started rolling and the movie came on. But you see the moment with the son and then their future reconciliation as the dad realizes, oh, you weren't kidding. The plate has been fixed. The monsters are here and something's going on in the woods. Maybe that would have been a nice moment if the dad had said, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. Now that we have to fight these eiders off, you warned me and I didn't listen and that's on me.
I love that you bring up the woods because something I really thought about the second time I watched it is like, what are these woods doing? Are the woods a place of danger like in a fairy tale? Or is this Eden where they are going to like gain knowledge and enter a world where death exists? The woods are an ambiguous element of the movie. And I feel like there's a lot to unpack there that I've only sort of started paying attention to.
Liz and I sort of disagreed about that interpretation. Mine was sort of it gives you your heart's desire. If you want to fix the thing, if you want to manifest these negative emotions, sort of the C.S. Lewis, God gives you what you want forever. So choose wisely what it is that you truly desire and let your heart be changed by the atonement so that you want the correct things and can return to live with God as opposed to just being trapped in a universe of your own making. Somehow, it was sort of how I had read it, but I like your Eden interpretation, especially the son who's carrying around his mother's ashes is like trying to return to some kind of more innocent existence by going back to this pond, right? But that's not the correct way to move forward. The only way out is through. And that's very Latter-day Saint in that we are now here and we will have these negative experiences and we must deal with them appropriately as part of our growth. That's why we are here, to have bad things happen to us, to make mistakes, to sin, to err, and to then ultimately return to God better because of our mortality and our experiences. And so even the son's attempt to go back and fix everything, it's very anti-Latter-day Saint theology. I hadn't even considered it that way. That's good.
But it's attractive, right? Like, who wouldn't want, this is exactly why it's dangerous, because it's beautiful and attractive, and I very much understand why someone would want it. But in the end, you don't run from your pain by covering it up. You have to feel it. And that's what the movie is about.
This is a different horror experience, but I thought actually Alien Earth had some really interesting things to say about this. Have you watched any of it?
I haven't, but they did mention Alien as one of the touch points for this film. Like when he's reaching into the closet to grab his stuff, there's no jump scare there, but it's telling you there's going to be a jump scare, and there isn't, and there isn't, and there isn't. And
right, and then there is later. But there's sorry, minor spoilers ahead for Alien Earth. There's a moment where these children that they have placed into these robot bodies, and then they send these children to go to the crashed spaceship with all the creepy aliens on it. Like, this is just a terrible idea. But the people who do this are terrible people, which is sort of the thesis of the show. One of the girls is basically having post-traumatic stress disorder because she's this like 9-year-old in this nearly immortal, very strong 30-year-old body. But she was thrown into this situation that's really bad for her. And they're like, oh, we don't know how to fix this. Let's just erase her memory of the last week and a half and it'll all be fine. And spoiler alert, it's not fine. Like, that doesn't work. And so I don't know what the protocol is for giving 9-year-old bodies and robot bodies therapy, but you should have tried that instead of just erasing it. Because the pain is what makes us, helps us grow and change and mature, which is the whole point of our earth life here, according to the Latter-day Saint theology.
exactly. And one thing that I think this movie does well is it gives this to all the major characters. I saw in the notes, it looked like you guys already talked about Bowman, who goes from being annoying to giving the St. Crispin's Day speech, which is interesting because I should say that I don't buy the St. Crispin's Day speech. I don't think Hal is a different person when he becomes King Henry. Like, I know I'm alone on that, but I really don't think he does. But for Bowman, it is that. Like, he used to be Hal, he used to be annoying, and now he's King Henry, and he gives the heroic speech, and it's kind of great.
That's interesting. I think you are in the minority, but even if you're right about King Henry and the St. Crispin's Day speech, we sure want it to be true, don't we?
Yeah, and the people do too. That's why it works.
Yes, yes. And that's interesting. Is he faking it? That's like a whole other thread we could sort of get into now. Maybe we should do an episode on like Kenneth Branagh as Henry V or something.
That'd be great. I haven't seen that since high school. Yeah, because he definitely buys it, right? And I think if you only do Henry V, you have to buy it. It's when you watch the two Henry IVs first that my skepticism, that's where it comes from. But I am really good at, Carl, at getting you to talk about movies that are not the movie we're talking about.
They're not the movie that we're talking about. Well, that's fine because it's all the storytelling and it's this theme of tragedy and loss and negative emotion and how you change and deal with that. How you change from being a bully to giving the sketch version of the St. Crispin's Day speech.
So this also gets to this question of, is Bowman a jerk to her because he's got a crush on the little friend in class, right? Which I think we can all agree is A, a real thing, and also B, not a good thing. But in the commentary, I really appreciated what the writer and producers said about this. They're like, Amber's right. Amber says maybe he's just a creep. Yeah, he is just a creep, and little boys can do better.
I agree. Having been a little boy myself, we can do better. I do think there's something to the idea that if you are interested in a person, you pay more attention to them, and that maybe manifests in weird ways. But it's certainly something we should teach our boys to be better about, so they're not as awkward as young elementary school and teenage Carl was back in the day. And this is just a problem in our society in general, and that's maybe a good thing that this movie sort of showcases is these two kids going from bully and bullied to reconciling a little bit and fighting the monsters, literally fighting the monsters together. You can make friends with people. It's fine. It doesn't all have to be kid crushes and whatever else. Just go fight some monsters. It's cool.
Yes, I'm going to try to say this in a way that isn't spoilery, but the writer-director said the tentacles moment is the reason he kept trying to make this movie for 18 years, because that moment he knew would be awesome. And it is. It is awesome.
It was. That was probably the coolest 10 seconds of the movie.
Oh my gosh. And it's competitive.
Right? And I liked that they were still manifesting when they have the big hug, the moment of sort of physical reconciliation between the father and his two children about how he apologizes for not being a good dad, and they're sort of like, well, we haven't handled this well either, but now we've all fought our demons, in her case, quite literally, this weird parallel version of herself, this doppelganger, that the brother says, that's not you. Like, go fight.
Yeah, in fact, I wrote almost that whole bit down. I can read it to you. So the sort of the key monster, the main monster, Bowman, the friend, says, that's basically you, right? And then the brother says, is that how you see yourself? That thing looks nothing like you. You're nothing like that. You're not an evil person because you drew some evil pictures. You also drew this. And then he shows all the beautiful things that she had drawn before their mother died, and she's been working on that.
Which is a wonderful moment, because I feel that this is the Joseph Smith quote, right? Where he talks about how God will be more generous to all of us than we can even possibly imagine, which just goes to show part of, I think, living the way God would like us to is to see ourselves the way God does and to give ourselves the same grace, which I think as a whole we are generally terrible at. I did this wrong, I committed this sin, I fell back into this pattern, you just down on yourself. Oh, that it would be so nice to just have a physical manifestation of all of my sins and weaknesses that I could just kill with a Minecraft sword, but that's not how it works in real life, unfortunately.
I'm teaching Elders Quorum this Sunday, and my text is Elder Gong's talk from the last conference. And Elder Gong talks about how he was talking to a young man who thought that because he had done some bad things, he could never be forgiven. The celestial kingdom was out of reach. And Elder Gong was able to talk to him and make him feel better. And then he shared this story at a stake conference or something. And he got a letter from someone who had served 2 missions. So I think the second one must have been a senior mission. We're talking about someone closer to the end of their life. And he said, Elder Gong, I'm so grateful for that story because I've served a mission, got married in the temple, had wonderful children, served a second mission, and I've always believed that I can't be saved because of things I did as a youth. One of the things I like about that scene where they all hug is that the visual proof that she's a different person is part of that hug. And it's evidence that you don't have to go back. You don't have to be the person you were. you're becoming something. And this life is a journey and you're going to become something. And what you become, even if you have to pass through pain and hardship to get there, that person deserves to be loved. That person deserves to be saved.
1,000%. I love that. That is a great thought. And you're right that it's visually manifested in the moment because of the way these tentacles of her, these drawings, kind of like borderline self-harm wannabe. I'm not quite sure what, but they end up being her strength.
They are her strength.
The very thing that she does to herself in her anger and grief and fear and all the the dark side emotions that she's feeling becomes her source of strength. It's very Ether 12:26 there, right? I will make your weak things become strong unto you.
There is one more thing I'd like to talk about. And this probably should have been mentioned earlier, but I have this theory, Carl, and I thrust it on my students with some regularity, and that's that horror and comedy are playing very similar games. Both of them are about breaking the rules of reality in a way that is safe so you can laugh at it, or that is frightening so you're afraid of it. But both of them rely on surprise. Both of them rely on unusual juxtapositions. Horror and comedy obey a lot of the same rules. And I think this movie demonstrates that really exquisitely. Like I was talking earlier about in the theater, I laughed a lot and I jumped a lot. And I think that combination is great. And the comedy wins in this. It's definitely ultimately a comedy in the classic Greek sense, right? Because it's a happy ending. But I think that both comedy and horror are ways of dealing with the unexpected, sometimes the unwanted, but they're ways of coping with things. And by the end of the movie, I like to think that Amber and her whole family have left the horror movie and they're living in a comedy together where they can be happy. The epilogue that denouement there suggests that that's exactly what happened.
I mean, even just the fact that they don't end up selling the house. That was the part that I actually said I would have loved to have been in the theater because I was just watching it alone in my basement without anybody around. And I could tell that had I been in the theater, all the times where he runs back into the house while the realtor is showing the house to people, she's just like, and gets more and more frustrated, but can't just yell at him because there are people right there. I know I would have laughed at those moments really hard had I been in the theater with other people who were kind of snickering and giggling at this ongoing joke, but it didn't work because I was alone watching it by myself, which I think is just a plug for go see movies with friends, you guys, or family or however.
I think this is one of the great things about movies. We don't have that many communal art forms anymore. Go to the theater. This movie was so good in theaters, and I hope I convinced at least a few people to go while it was still in theaters because it was so much fun to watch with other people. Invite your friends over.
When I went and saw Predator Badlands, it was with like a whole bunch of friends of mine, and it was a much better experience because of that.
No doubt.
Yeah, that was fun. It's true. Like, what is the Bowling Alone, right? Is that book by the sociologist about how we've lost all of these little things, bowling leagues. People don't go to church as much, and just all these sort of secondary ways we could get to meet people out in the community and sort of be part of different groups of people. Now we just kind of get in our cars, drive to work, or don't drive to work if you work at home like so many of us do after the pandemic. And we've just lost so much of that. And so, yeah, I'm glad you had that experience in the theater. I wish I had, but at least I have Predator Badlands.
Yeah, we'll always have Predator.
We'll always have Predator. It's actually one of the ones I recommended in the what are you watching, reading, or listening to?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's good because I've never seen a Predator movie, but this one looks really good.
This one is fantastic, and it's fun, and it's PG-13 because there are literally no humans in the entire movie. There's copious amounts of violence, but none of it rises to the level of R-rated because it's just a monster. It's a fun movie. But to go back to the point, I like your thought that they are living in a... I don't know if comedy is quite the right genre, but they've certainly moved out of the horror movie into a new and a better place and stronger because they have gone through these terrible things, which includes all the drawings coming to life, but also the taking down of the pictures of the mother and just all the little things that they had sort of wounded each other with in their grief that they have now in a more healthy way dealt with. And I dare say will be stronger for it.
Yeah, it's almost like it doesn't need to be a horror or a comedy anymore. They can just live their lives.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get your view of our rating segment. So in our rating segment, clean versus objectionable material, where would you put it? Theric, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, or outer darkness?
So I remember, I forget what it was for now, but when Glenn Nelson was on, he really rejected this rating system. And I 100% agree with him, but I'm going to play the game anyway.
I know. We understand that these are imperfect metrics.
Which I think you said in the very first episode, the Encanto, right? Was your first episode? So
Yeah.
So I have a couple details I want to share with you before I answer the content question. First, when Angel Studios picked up the movie, the only change they asked for was to have all the taking of the Lord's name in vain removed, which the director said is fine, like didn't change the movie, totally fine, didn't bother him at all. And I have to say, I really appreciate that because that, as a kid, that was something that made something like Goonies impossible for me because the swearing really, really troubled me. And I still don't like it, obviously. And then the movie got a PG rating in America, but got the equivalent of a PG-13 rating in Britain because it showed kids how to make a flamethrower, which apparently kids in Britain don't know how to do.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then apparently they almost got the PG-13 in America when the last appearance of the flamethrower is a little bit more frightening. And I don't want to say what happens because it's part of the climax of the movie, but it did end up with a PG movie. And in my opinion, and I hinted at this earlier, like, I don't think what makes a movie's content objectionable or not is the clinical description. Like, it's scary. There's a fight. Like, to me, it's what is the movie doing with it? How is the movie reacting to it? Is it suggesting that this is good and this is the way the world should work? Is it showing that this is, like, what is it doing with it? I think that's the real question. What do we learn from it? And in my opinion, this movie easily clears the bar for Celestial. I really have no problems with it. I think it's excellent. Is it probably too scary for most 5-year-olds? Yeah, probably. But that's not the standard.
I agree entirely. That's not the standard. You can have movies that are celestial, but have very negative things because they are portrayed accurately. And that is part of life, is, as we talked about, to go through these negative experiences. But it's still a useful metric for our audience to be like, okay, would I take my 5-year-old to this?
That's why I'm happy to say Celestial, but I just felt I should explain it. I will say the only other Angel Studios movie I've seen is Truth and Treason, which has one of the most horrifying bits of torture I've seen in years. And again, I would call it Celestial because it's a beautiful and moving movie about what it means to be a Latter-day Saint in modern times.
So Artistic Merit, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. What do you think?
I thought it was great. Roger Ebert, when he would do star ratings, he would judge movies by what they were trying to be. So a really great action movie might not be as good as, say, Casablanca, but they both get 5 stars because they're excellent at what they are. I think this is absolutely a 5 popcorn ball movie. It's one of the best kids movies I've seen in years. And granted, some of the kids movies from the last few years I most want to see, like, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and A Bird Named Catherine, or whatever it's called. Catherine Called Birdie, every what it's called. There's a few movies I really want to see that I haven't seen, but of the ones I have seen, this is the easy winner. And I think our conversation today demonstrates that there's plenty to talk about in this movie when it comes to gospel connections. So I'm 5 across the board.
And the fact that we had our conversation after I had one with Liz, and the Venn diagram didn't overlap that much. Like, the people listening to this would be like, okay, they'd hit a little bit on that in the first and the second half, but most of it was quite different. And I think that is instructive in how good the movie is and the conversations that it can generate. So yeah. And I assume that means 5 apricots for gospel connections, morally edifying messages.
555. Perfect score. I'm the Russian judge voting for the Russian, like, ice skater gymnast.
Right. I gave it 4 apricots just because, and listeners of the podcast will know, I don't give something 5 unless there's like an explicit Christ-centered gospel connection.
You know that about you.
I just want to reserve it for those things.
I think that's fair. Perhaps if I was on every episode, I would agree with you, but I'm not, so.
Yeah, it's not your burden to bear. Right. Well, thank you for joining us for this Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree. You can find me at Carl Cranney on Threads if you're interested in getting in touch. Liz, where can people find you?
You can always follow my writing and book reviews at lizbusby.com.
All right, Theric, where can people find you if they're interested in following your work or seeing the things that you're involved in online?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Most places I am Thmazing, Thmazing. Currently, I'm most active on Blue Sky, but you can get me in your email inbox by subscribing at thmazing.substack.com. I have my own podcast on the Dialogue Podcast Network. It's called Face and Hat. Our most recent episode was about the Apostolic Interregnum. And we're currently this season reading Benjamin Park's American Zion, the new 1-volume history of the church, which is a great book, and we're having fun conversations with it. My newest novel is Just Julie's Fine. It's about BYU. You're going to love it. I have a story coming out in the Center for Latter-day Saint Arts Advent Calendar. You should sign up to get those in your inbox. So there's a nice variety to choose from.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with a friend who enjoys good movies and good conversation. You can also subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice or on YouTube. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode via email, social media, or on our website. It really makes our day as podcast hosts to hear from you. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.